Thank you, Mr. Stephen Young.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let me try quickly to set the context of my remarks with the two distinguished speakers before me. I was asked to talk about trust and religion. Let me try to suggest, in line with Professor Bruni, that the dynamic of trust we could understand as creating the we frame. That's just one sentence. We could think about that and go into it. But trust is a dyadic function. There's some sort of a we there, right? I don't trust nothing. I have to trust somebody or something, right? Secondly, when I talk about Luther and Calvin in a little bit, I would like you to think about that what they are pushing as Protestantism in the world, what Abraham Kuyper, distinguished 19th century Dutch theologian and politician, talked about as the realm of common grace. That this is what Professor Bruni was talking about as internalizing the common good as a private good. Next, the notion that character can influence market participants, which Eric gave us a nice exposition of. To reflect on the implication of my talk is high trust and low trust societies, which I'm not going to talk about too much, but please think about those things as connecting to his vision of how a good market system can work. Roughly speaking, to link the two, a high trust society is consistent with John Locke's work, which I'll mention briefly, and a low trust society is very consistent with Thomas Hobbes. Trust to take effect needs character. What I'm going to argue is that religion shapes character, and character shapes utility curves, which the economists can then graph. A snapshot of one of my theses here in the Netherlands is that what do you get when you get a whole bunch of dedicated Calvinists, as you had in the Netherlands, England, and Scotland, about 1550 to 1700. What do you get? You get a whole bunch of trustworthy people, right? These are people who basically, in theory and apparently in practice, tell the truth, don't lie, work hard, go to bed early, get up early, they pay their debts on time, and they save money. What's not to like? What do you then get when you get a whole bunch of people living this way? Capitalism. However, your group is interested in the economy, religion, governance, and organizations. I'm going to touch a little bit on governance and, by implication, on the economy, as I want to sort of go through where we are in our world today as it relates to trust and then trust to religion. We live in an age of discontent. Various expressions of tribalism are replacing the cosmopolitan, globalized, international order under the rule of law, having respect for human rights, which was put in place after World War II. Vladimir Putin is reaching back in time to the founding of Muscovy to derive reasons for the legitimacy of his Russia from the medieval dreams of a third Rome. That vision of the Orthodox, that Moscow was created by God to save humanity for Christ. And where did that take place? In the Ukraine, right? With Vladimir, who converted. Xi Jinping in China is reaching back to the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang, to legitimize for today autocratic rule by his Communist Party through reliance on Han chauvinism, not communism. Islamic fundamentalists are reaching back to the mythical decades after the Prophet, when supposedly righteous caliphs, the four righteous caliphs, ruled the submissive and conforming faithful. In the United States, Donald Trump trumpets the moral superiority of America being first and great among nations. However, a recent survey of Americans by Pew Research found, quote, Americans today deny each other's facts, disapprove of each other's lifestyles, avoid each other's neighborhoods, impugn each other's motives, doubt each other's patriotism, can't stomach each other's news sources, and bring different value systems to such core social institutions as religion, marriage, and parenthood. And as an American, I can tell you that's true. I have been experiencing that every day, every week, every month since last November and a little bit before, and it's getting worse. There is little social, cultural, or political peace today in my country. Americans do not trust each other anymore. In Germany, Angela Merkel is elected head of a coalition government with 33% of the vote. Someone told me this morning that here in the Netherlands, you finally have a government. After 220 days, it's a coalition of 4 parties which has a majority of 1, right? Which means any one of those characters on any particular vote can walk, and then where are you? Right? How much trust do you have anymore as a great Calvinist nation? In the UK, loyalty to the old notions of British exceptionalism has provoked a secession from the European Union. In Kurdistan, the Kurds have voted for independence, and that is roiling the Middle East. In Sunday, in Catalonia, there's a vote for, I did not hear the King's speech, but Spain is not going to be a happy place. In Myanmar, those of a different religion and ethnic origin are oppressed. In the Middle East, Sunni and Shia are at war. Jews and Palestinians can't tolerate each other. Kim Jong-un uses the morality of a Korean chauvinism, Juche, to stay in power by building up the military might. The consequence of that is that Japan's prime minister responds with heightened deference to Japanese chauvinism. When the world is broken into tribes and is governed with self-seeking, it is not peaceful. Particularly in America, At the same time, we have this tribalism here. We have another phenomenon, particularly in America and in Europe, which is the failure of elites. The inability of cultural, economic, and political elites to hold the respect of those less favored in the economy and politics has promoted a loss of trust in the institutions of governance which sustain the well-being of modern civilization. American politics is broken. The center has collapsed. And you cannot have effective constitutional democracy without a vital center. Some of you may know the poem of Yeats, The Second Coming. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction. The worst are full of passionate intensity. I give you Ezekiel 34. I don't have time to read it, but there is an Old Testament judgment of the Lord Yahweh on the shepherds, the stewards of Israel, for failing to take care of the flock. When there's a collapse of elite, when there is no trust, when there's too much tribalism, the resulting lack of trust is a serious systemic deficit in global social capital. However, ironically, very briefly, we have the ideals of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals, which lay out, I would submit to you, a high, idealistic, and satisfactory roadmap for the human community, which embraces and builds upon the post-World War II vision of a peaceful world providing rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all people. But we cannot achieve the SDGs without trust. And trust cannot be imposed on a community. It cannot be commanded to stand forth, as Athena did from the head of her father Zeus. But, Athena-like, we can bring forth trustworthiness from within ourselves. Trust is created by being trustworthy. The starting point for building trust is personal character. Some of you may know the song by Bonnie Raitt. American? Okay. The one I like is, you step out on the track in the pouring rain. When you get run over, you blame the train. Ain't it time to get a different view? Can't just wait around for what you want. It's all about the way you choose. Ain't nobody else can make things right. Baby, it's down to you. So, fidelity to standards of stewardship is needed to restore our collective well-being. A quick pause on the concept of stewardship. I would submit to the discussion earlier this morning on the circle economy that for that to succeed, we need a much more intense perception and feeling that we are stewards rather than we are owners. Because under the law, and the feeling is, owners have dominion. You can do any damn thing you please with your car, your this, your that, your waste, your food. If you are a steward, you are a temporary occupant. You are a temporary holder of something in a long chain of creation that started before you got a hold of this thing and is going to continue after you relinquish it. A steward has temporary custody. It's like renting or leasing. And the idea of a steward is you have to pass on the thing more or less in good shape. So if you got to worry about life cycle or something that's going to be circular, or how do you go from cradle to grave, a stewardship ethic is most appropriate. Now, what is stewardship? What is being trustworthy? It's a form of self-actualization, to borrow a term from Maslow, and I would put it in a traditional sense, it's a charis, which has two contexts. One is religious, the charis associated with Christianity and Jesus Christ. It's a grace. Secondly, with Max Weber, it's charismatic. It's something unique about us that we bring to the situation. It's not rational, legal, and it's not based on interest. A charis cannot be achieved by reasoning alone, nor can it be acquired through technical training and skill development. No matter how brilliant you are in your PhD program, you may or may not be a charismatic. Lack of this grace cripples our modern, well-educated, meritocratic elites who rule us from official stations of expertise and legal authority. Lack of grace causes them to serve themselves first. It alienates the people from them. Hillary Clinton still does not understand why she lost when she was so well educated and so experienced. The simple explanation was she was not trusted. The levels of trust in both Clinton and Trump were disturbingly low. The very low levels of trust in America of our political institutions today makes them unsustainable. Let me here comment in the context of your work, the relationship between governance and the economy. If you have rotten, lousy, corrupt, rent-extracting governance, you ain't ever going to have a good, just, fair economic system. The governance provides the formative foundation for your economic activity. Even Milton Friedman concedes that, right? How are you going to run what kind of economy are you going to have in a system where contracts will not be enforced, where there will be spoliation, where the police sergeant can show up at your door anytime and take as many avocados or pesos or whatever that he or she wants? Another factor I think that we need to think about in terms of trust is that confidence in the relevance of a personal charismatic grace has been undermined by our 19th century advocates of materialism. Materialism that grounds the human person, not in a sense of charis, but in something more mundane. Herbert Spencer's social Darwinism denied that we have a moral sense. Karl Marx defended his dialectical materialism as the ultimate driver of history and the master of our fates. Friedrich Nietzsche trumpeted the will to power of the Übermensch as the only possible response to a cosmic nihilism. Sigmund Freud argued that our egos were slaves to a libidinous id and a corrupting superego of social convention. Under each of these social philosophies, for different reasons, no one could be trustworthy. Ladies and gentlemen, is it any surprise that the 20th century brought upon this planet the most horrific murder of human beings since the beginning of time, after all these philosophies were out there? It was very much a Hobbesian notion of the war of all against all. And the Hobbes's quote, to build on the comment, the life of man under these circumstances where there is no trust, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. And if you're uncomfortable with that, I give you Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and probably other places. Now, the norms of stewardship have long been clearly articulated in Anglo-American fiduciary law. They consist of a duty of loyalty and a duty of due care. This was helped by the Protestant Reformation, with the emphasis of Luther on vocation and of Calvin on personal ministry in the fallen world. They put stewardship as fundamental for individual well-being. And I think it is most appropriate to recall that 500 years ago this month, in about 3 weeks, one very stubborn Augustinian monk in Wittenberg, Germany, nailed up 95 propositions on a church door and shook Christendom and started the Protestant Reformation. When Luther concluded that the priesthood included all believers, not just a few who had been chosen by the church, but every man and woman, he put on the shoulders of every person responsibility to serve God in our daily tasks. John Calvin, in this vein, wrote, "Since you are his handiwork, you have been made over and bound to his command by right of reason, by right of creation, that whatever you undertake, whatever you do, ought to be ascribed to him. If this be so, it now assuredly follows that your life is wickedly corrupt, unless it be disposed to his service, seeing that his will ought to be for us the law by which we live." This is a we relationship, I submit to you, building on Professor Bruni's talk. You are a servant of something higher. There's a we relationship. It's not all about you as an I, as an ego, as a homo economicus. Forgetful of ourselves, surely subordinating our self-concern, we try faithfully to devote our zeal to God and his commandments. From this Protestant theology during the 1600s in Holland and England came both capitalism, and we need to remember constitutional democracy, which have shaped modern civilization, I submit, for the better. The English Calvinists, at the end of their civil war against King Charles, put him on trial for treason on the following grounds, quote, "that the said Charles Stuart, being admitted King of England, and therein trusted, with a limited power to govern by and according to the laws of the land, and not otherwise, and by his trust, oath, and office, being obliged to use the power committed to him for the good and benefit of the people, and for the preservation of their rights and liberties, yet nevertheless, out of a wicked design to erect and uphold in himself an unlimited and tyrannical power to rule according to his will, did levy war against the present Parliament and the people therein represented." So we had the execution of Charles I, we had the Commonwealth, the interregnum, then we had Charles II, then we had James II, who sort of was too much the old-fashioned autocratic king, and the solution to the English situation was provided by William of Orange. When William of Orange accepted this Calvinist concept of kingly rule as a trust of limited power, he was made King of England. Thereupon John Locke set forth a theory of such constitutional rule under the principle that public office is a public trust. So very briefly, to move ahead quickly, one, this is the formation of the ideology behind the American Declaration of Independence. We rebelled against King George III because he had broken his trust, he's breached his trust. We then created a constitution which separates powers in order to preserve public office as a public trust. And we in the Co-Roundtable, we have suggested for governments in the world, in order to create a space for a moral capitalism, they need to respond as good trustees of public office. Moving then to the economy. On the level of social theory, the Protestant emphasis on personal trustworthiness was elaborated by the English Whigs as a universal anthropology which they call the moral sense. As was mentioned earlier, Adam Smith in 1759 wrote a book on the theory of the moral sentiments. In lectures given at the University of Glasgow on jurisprudence in 1762, Smith applied the moral sense to business. And I submit, and some Smith scholars do, that even though his famous book on capitalism, The Wealth of Nations, did not expressly talk about the need and role of morality for successful markets, it's implicit, because Smith brought over into that book his conviction that we have inside us, each of us, a moral sense. The issue is, do we develop our moral sense or not? The Protestants, as I say, quoting Luther and Calvin, insist that that is a principal responsibility of us as human beings, to develop our moral sense. Catholic social teachings respond to the processes and outcomes of modern capitalism, but do not expressly speak in the vocabulary of stewardship or the moral sense. They have four key principles: respect for human dignity, choosing solidarity in our means and manner of living, using subsidiarity in our use of power and decision-making, and seeking the common good out of awareness that what we have from God is not for us to selfishly exploit or stupidly misuse. Such Catholic social teachings point us to the duties of shepherds in serving the common good of humanity. I have some suggestions here for a Protestant set of principles for social teachings, which I think also move in this direction of creating a sense of we-ness, if you will. In the Quran, there's a parallel. The Quran, for its part, provides important guidance on the norms of stewardship. Quran teaches that God created men and women equally to serve as his stewards, Khalifa, in the world, to care for his creation. In addition, Quran instructs that we hold our powers and our wealth in trust, amana. Apparently in Arabic, amana is the literal word for trust. God has given us all these things as part of his tawhid in trust, that we make good use of them. Now, neither Chinese nor Buddhist theology use the terms of steward or fiduciary behavior, but each prescribes behaviors which can earn trust from others and which condition our character and decision-making in this life to be trustworthy. Confucius articulated a sense of personal responsibility, not unlike Luther's concept of vocation. Particular sentence I quote is Chun Chun Chen Chen Fu Fu Tzu Tzu. The Lord lords, the minister ministers, the father fathers, and the son sons. If everybody does what they're supposed to do, according to their particular station in life, there will be peace and happiness and reciprocity, and we can trust each other. Now, the Buddha presented his understanding of the human condition as a pathway to sustainability through mindfulness, as I think you all probably know. The Dharma, the Indo-European root word of the Dharma, means to hold up, to maintain, to sustain, to make sure things can become fruitful as we go forward. However, as the Buddha noted, there's a kind of weakness in human nature, which are called the charises. The Dalai Lama refers to them as afflictive emotions. There are things like greed, hate, delusion, conceit, wrong views, doubt, torpor, restlessness, shamelessness, recklessness. But these charises are in our minds, which means we have the potential of controlling them through mindfulness. How do we do that? How do we generate the power to minimize the charises and change our character, change our utility curves, right? Well, we have virtues. We build virtues. This is actually rather sort of Aristotelian and even similar to Thomas Aquinas. The virtues are called paramitras. And as the Buddhists do, they have a list. Generosity, giving of oneself, Professor Bruni was talking about. Morality, proper conduct. Renunciation. Transcendent wisdom, insight. Energy, diligence, vigor, effort. Patience, tolerance, forbearance, acceptance, endurance. Truthfulness, honesty, determination, resolution, loving kindness, equanimity, and serenity. My submission is, as I tried to highlight at the beginning, that our religious traditions in various ways create opportunities for us to control ourselves, to build up in the moral sense, to shape our character, to shape our utility curves in ways which promote trustworthiness and therefore earn trust of others, and which therefore make possible not only just government, but fruitful capitalism. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, please. Please, Stephen, stay one moment for see if there are some questions. Do you have any questions? Jan, yeah.
Thank you. I have a question on the violation of trust. You told us the example of the English king who violated the trust of his people and was therefore beheaded. What do you think how we should react if our trust in someone is violated?
I mean, there's a lot to say on that. First of all, we refer to the law and legal systems, there are many rules of law and proceedings and standards about what you can do. And in the Anglo-American law, there are all kinds of cases and precedents on violation of loyalty, due care, what damages are, whether you can get specific enforcement, imposition of a constructive trust, all kinds of things. In our political realm in the United States, the particular device is impeachment. You take the person out of the office and you put somebody else in the office. If you happen to live in a society where there are no normal remedies, usually what happens, and John Locke wrote about this, is that you have rebellion, civil war, assassinations, coups d'etats, and none of which tends to lead to fruitful outcomes.
Any more questions? Then I have a question for you, because it occurred to me that I didn't actually properly introduce you, because of course you are a director of the Koch's Institute Program for Moral Capitalism.
Right.
Could you explain to us what you do?
Well, I try to, with our network, about 3,000 people around the world, we try to work with ideas and concepts in sessions like this. On the one hand, we try to think up ways of thinking about capitalism and morality, these complicated issues, and then secondly, how do you make it practical? Can you come up with tools and metrics and things like that? And then how do you put that in the hands of people? We have found, and we've spent a lot of work over the last 10, 12 years with different cultures and religions. I think sort of an instinctive effort to respond to and react to the rising tribalism. So for example, if I as an American show up in China and start to lecture the Chinese on how they should run things, I don't get very far. If I can work with Chinese colleagues and we can base very similar ideas on, say, Confucius or Mencius, we get a lot farther. We spent a long time working with Islamic colleagues and have come up with a sense, awkward because I'm not Muslim, that while Muslim scholars have not developed these interpretations of aspects of ayah in the Quran for hundreds of years, they're in the Quran. And they allow an interpretation of Islam, which is very, very compatible and close to our capitalism and John Locke's thesis about public offices of public trust. I can share some stories on that. We don't have time for that. But there is something out there, a point of convergence among the Abrahamic family of religions around this concept of responsible stewardship.
Okay, that's clear. Well, thank him once again for his very interesting talk. Thank you, Stephen.